they say that to everybody all day.
This is the morning, Tammy. You don't need to see her very often.
Oh, you working mornings?
There's something to point out to you. Both buses had this thing right here. That's where trouble. This was kind of bad. This got even worse. But we didn't get some of the worst of it.
And what's the worst? What are we talking about as far as the worst goes?
Well, the IRS was asking many groups for their members list, donors list, detailed information on private discussions, email, Facebook, web pages, all the material literature that they put out, and not just samples, but they in some cases asked for everything. It was very abusive. Our concern about this is that our founding fathers, they gave us a country after fearing and despising tyranny, and to give us that government, they give us a constitution that severely restricts federal government. And what we've done with those restrictions, we've cast them aside so that now we've got an administration that's targeting its political enemies by using the IRS to suppress freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. It's sent the FBI out to suppress and intimidate freedom of press by going after AP weapons. It's also trying to cover up this negligence to protect national interests and guns. It's not a cover up and continues to lie to the American people, lie to the Congress, lie to the union, lie to
Who do you think is accountable for the IRS scandal?
Well, the buck absolutely stops with the president. Political operatives inside the White House, inside the IRS, etc., they take their orders directly from the president. He sets the tone, he sets the agenda, he approves it even if it's initiated by somebody else. It's not done in darkness. He absolutely knew about these things. I just saw a news report on Drudge where it's saying that the IRS deliberately hid its probe and its findings until after the election. That's a political decision. That is totally out of bounds for the IRS. When you have...
What do you guys want to what do you guys want to happen in this situation?
We want a return to constitutionally limited government. That's the main call of the Tea Party. That solves a whole lot of the other bills. In this specific thing, we want the people who were responsible for the oversight and the direction of the decisions, and those who went along with those decisions and orders, to be prosecuted, not just fired, prosecuted. One of the scary aspects of this is that the lady who was the commissioner of the IRS during the time of these abuses of power, she has now been moved to a different department. She is going to be heading up the IRS Enforcement Department for Obamacare. Now, if she was so willing to go after political enemies and abuse the power and not treat all Americans fairly, just on the regular applications for nonprofit status, what is she going to do in Obamacare when there's so many people that are opposed to Obamacare and trying to stop that? We can expect the same abuses.
Were there any people at the IRS offices in Jackson that did any of this?
No, we were not in communication with Jackson IRS people. These were in other parts of the country.
Okay. So you're looking for people not only to be fired, but prosecuted.
Yes, ma'am. They need to be prosecuted. They have violated the essential trust that the American people have to have in its government officials, that is a level playing field. There is a uniform enforcement of law. We are a nation of laws. We believe in the rule of law, not in the rule of men. And what has happened now is people have cast off the Constitution. We are having the rule of men. And that has to stop. And it's time for the Congress and the senators to stand up and hold these people accountable.
And you think this was political?
Oh, there's no doubt it was political. I mean, if you just look at the groups that were targeted, another news story today talks about one of Obama's family foundations got immediate approval. There's several liberal organizations that were immediately approved. They, in their filtering of groups, they didn't include progressive. They didn't include things that related to social welfare or social justice. They didn't inhibit any of those groups. It was only those that expressed a belief in our Constitution, in our freedoms as Americans. That's who they targeted.
So are you thinking that Democrats were using this to get him elected?
Well, I think there were several things going on. We've noticed that tyrants do not like exposure. They do not like opposition and criticism. And so what tyrants have done all across the world is they suppress freedom of press. They suppress and restrict freedom of speech. They won't allow you to assemble. They make it harder for you to do anything that is not in agreement with them. That's how tyrants behave. That is not how constitutional republics and presidents would act and behave. That's how tyrants behave.
Now, did you guys hand over any of the documents that I guess were requested?
No, we did not. We did not hand over any of the invasive things that were requested. And I gave you here a list of the things they did, and you can read the documents yourselves. There were other Tea Parties that got much worse inquiries than we did, but you will see for yourself that they were asking us was invasive, absolutely unnecessary.
At what point were you kind of like, something fishy here?
I was upset with the first request for information, and then I got mad and outraged with the second one. And that was January, I believe it was, of 2010. That one was simply off the charts.
What were they asking for?
They were asking for complete lists of who we had talked to in legislatures, complete email lists of all emails sent, all web pages, all literature distributed, all plans and discussions that we're having, things like that. Things that are, frankly, none of their business. To grant a tax-exempt status, all they need to know is, are you conducting a legal operation to express political opinion? How are you handling money? How are you handling the relationship between a nonprofit and campaigns, etc.? They don't have to have all this detailed information on who you're talking to, what you're doing, what you're planning, what you're saying. That's none of their business.
Did you know at the time that they were targeting other
We
tax-exempt?
Yes, we heard about it very quickly. And some of the duplicity and I think obstruction of justice that's been taking place is the administration of the president saying they knew nothing about any of this going on until after the IG's report. This stuff was being reported back when it was happening. Tea Party groups were getting on the news. I think Drudge carried some stories on it about this kind of abuse. It was not happening to us. People talked, and we heard it right away. And this was in the news that these kind of things were going on. So when the president, when the administration, when the DOJ, when the IRS commissioner, when any of these people start saying, well, they didn't know, they weren't aware, they're lying. Plain and simple, they're lying. And these are impeachable offenses. There is no place in this country for tyrants. Tyrants abuse the rights of people. And that's what we have right now. We have tyranny taking place in the United States using the two most fearful agents of the government, the DHS and the FBI and the IRS, to suppress the rights of its citizens. That's not constitutional. That's not how constitutional governments operate. That's how tyrants operate.
Let's take a look at some of this paperwork you have. So this is your timeline status.
Yes,
so
right. And
filing for the incorporation.
Yeah, this is the state corporation trying to get exemption status, and then we got the
Now, did they ultimately approve you?
No. What we did, we ended up abandoning our request for tax-exempt status. I was not going to waste the Tea Party's time and resources fighting with a monstrous department the size of the IRS. That diverts us from what we're trying to do, which is to call for a rebirth of American freedom and liberty, a rebirth of limited government, a rebirth of fiscal responsibility, a rebirth of free markets. So we were not going to be distracted like this, and so we just sidestepped it and let them go on, and we continued to.
Yeah, but looking at these dates here, you were working on this since '09.
That's right.
And you abandoned it when?
I believe the date right here, February 28th of last year.
Sad.
Yeah, it's very sad. But like I say, go back and catch some of the latest headlines right now. Other progressive, liberal, socialist groups were quickly getting approval. In fact, this same lady who was a commissioner, she personally approved one organization. They also targeted other types of conservative and religious organizations. For instance, there was one.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here, okay? Because you've got people at home that are probably sitting there saying, well, you want tax-exempt status, so there are certain things that you're going to have to prove to the government.
Absolutely.
I mean, naturally.
Absolutely.
So why shouldn't they ask for all those things?
Well, they need to ask for the things that show that you're behaving in a tax-exempt manner. what you're distributing, what your message is, who you're talking to, those are not matters of regulation, whether it's tax exempt or not. Those are private matters. Those are freedom of speech matters. The tax exempt status doesn't say you have to agree with the federal government. It says that you have to handle money in certain ways. Those requests are absolutely fine. How do we handle money? Are we using money outside of the purposes?
So where are you
of tax
saying
exempt?
that they went wrong?
When they wanted details of our communication, when they wanted details on the board members and their resumes, and they wanted all of our emails, when they wanted copies of all the web pages, copies of all of the literature, any literature we put out, copies of any discussions that we had with legislators, anything, all of that's far excessive. That is what tax exempt organizations do. They distribute information, they talk to people, they try to get certain things done. When those things are legitimate, they have nothing to do with whether an organization is tax exempt or not. It's simply on how they use those funds. Those questions we didn't object to, but it's when it gets invasive is when it starts asking detailed personal information as to who we are, our backgrounds, who we're talking to, the details of our conversations, details of our plans, and any literature for their review, as if that is something they would approve or not approve. That is tyrannical abuse of power.
That's when it became too much for you. And what do we have here? What's this letter?
These are the two letters. This is the first one, September 28th.
Oh, this is when they're asking for what?
Yeah, let's see, that would be, here's the first letter. I'll get the copy of the other one for you. This is the letter where they started asking for some of these things. I started them up on another one, but you'll run through here and you'll start seeing them. Copies of your web pages. Copies of your web pages from the other website. Provide specific examples of activities you have conducted to accomplish your mission. Your website says your purpose of these issues team, state and local list, Tea Party involvement. Your issues team is also establishing position statements. Provide copies of such statements. Those statements are none of their business. What my political position is none of their business for determining tax exempt status. But if you're an oppressive government that believes you have the power to control what people say, then you start asking those kind of questions. That's why we say this is how tyrants act. This is not how constitutional presidents and governments act.
Roy, let me get you to say and spell your name for us.
Roy Nicholson, Nicholson.
And what's your position
I'm
with the Tea Party?
chairman of the Mississippi Tea Party. And the Mississippi Tea Party is a voluntary association of independent tea parties from around the state.
Now, I understand that most Tea Party members, I guess, are Republican. Is that accurate?
That percentage-wise it may be, but we do not consider ourselves a partisan group. We're not advocating for Republicans or Democrats. We are advocating on principles, freedom of speech. The main purposes that the Tea Party's been advocating for since almost the very beginning has been limited government, constitutional limited government, fiscal responsibility, and free markets. Those are what made our country great and powerful and strong and free. And we're calling for a return to those ancient principles that needs to be so. We can do that. We're not anti-government. We're anti the abuse of government authority.
In one word, when this scandal broke, what did you think?
Hallelujah at last. Because we knew it was going on, and it was time for it to be exposed, so we were glad to see it.
All right. Anything else you think we might have missed? I think we got pretty much
Did I
everything.
say anything about how tyrants act?
He's a riot.
Okay, Roy Nicholson, Nicholson.
How you play first name?
R-O-Y.
In your position.
I'm chairman of the Mississippi Tea Party. And the Mississippi Tea Party is a voluntary association of independent tea parties from around the state.
Gotcha. We're going to, because political stories can be so over the head, sometimes we're going to take this very slow.
Okay.
So, what year did you apply for tax exempt status? When?
In December of 2009, we formally submitted our request to be a 501c4 corporation. That means that we'd be tax exempt but allowed to engage in the political process. What that also means is that people can make donations to it, but they are not deductible from their own taxes, so they're non-deductible donations.
So you filed in December '09.
Yes.
What happened after that? You submit your application.
We submitted the application, didn't hear anything for a while. Then we finally received a request for some basic information in February that year. And then we didn't
February
hear,
of 10.
yeah, of 10. Then we didn't hear from them for quite a while. Finally, we heard back from them in September 20th. Let's see, dates. Yes, September 28th of 10, wanting additional information. And that information was troubling, and I discussed it with CPAs and lawyers, trying to find the best way to answer that. And they not really realizing that there was something going on at that time. They thought it would be kind of standard and no problem. But then,
So February, when they asked for basic information, you were cool.
I wasn't cool, but I was going along.
September comes around. That's when the red flags.
Well, that was September.
Oh, it's September.
That was September. But then January. Let me see. Let me get the date. January 10th of 2012 is when we got the second letter asking for even more information, and it was getting more and more invasive. It wanted things like the names and resumes of all of our board members. It wanted to have all of our emails. It wanted to have all of our web pages, all literature, all discussion, all plans that we were having, everything we've ever said or thought about an issue, and what were we trying to do, who in the legislature had we talked to, were we trying to get any legislation done, et cetera, et cetera. Just very invasive things that were none of their business. For example, they wanted to know what positions we were taking and what we were saying about those positions. That's
What kind of position?
any position, whatever our positions that we were advocating for.
Oh, okay. I see.
Okay, that kind of information is irrelevant to the approval of tax-exempt status. With tax-exempt status, it's about how you handle money and who can receive tax deductions and things like this. It's not about what is your position, but by including those questions in the letters, they make it appear as though, depending on what we said and we're saying, to determine whether or not we would be approved or not.
So when you, in January 2012, after that application, where did you go from there?
Well, basically we discussed it and we decided to abandon our tax-exempt status with the federal government. And the reason for that was they were using the power of the IRS to suppress freedom of speech, to suppress the right to freely assemble, to suppress the right to petition the government for redress. That's what they were doing. They were using the IRS, one of the most feared departments of the federal government, to attack its political enemies. That is excessive abuse of power. So we felt like this was a deliberate political attempt to discourage us and to divert us away from our mission, which is to call for the restoration of constitutional limited government, fiscal responsibility, free markets. That's what we're advocating for. But to get tied up with fighting the IRS over these things would take up too much of our time and resources. So we said, well, just fine. We will just stop being a tax-exempt organization and go on with our work.
Gotcha. So what was the final straw that was like, okay, we have to back out?
It was that letter of January 2012.
So when it got to you first in September, kind of invasive, but you were like, okay, we'll just go along with it. January got more invasive. You're like, hey, you have to pull out. And you were speaking about tyrants.
Well, our founding fathers, they despised and feared tyrannical big government, oppressive big government. That's what they were rebelling against. They told us that legitimate government is founded to secure our God-given unalienable rights. To do that, to give us a legitimate government, they gave us a constitution that put severe restrictions on the federal government and its power. They established the rule of law, not the rule of men. But we've kind of cast off those constitutional restraints now, where whoever seems to be in power think they have the right and the power to just do whatever they want. They're not accountable to the people, and that they can basically control the people for their own will.
So when you saw that this is all falling apart in the media and in front of everybody's eyes, what did you think?
Well, I said, hallelujah, at last. Finally, this absolute tyrannical abuse of power was being exposed and could be stopped. But what concerns us is that they have fired the designated commissioner of the IRS, who was supposed to take that position, but who was leaving in June anyway. they fired him. Well, he was just the deputy commissioner when all this was being done. The commissioner at that time has since been reassigned to the IRS Department for Enforcement of Obamacare. Now, the Obamacare legislation gives the IRS tremendous policing power in this thing. And so now this woman who was completely abusive in the use of her power to attack political enemies of the president is now going to be running the IRS division of Obamacare? Can we expect less than such abusive treatment from her?
Well, that kind of gets to my second question. Next question: how do you feel that President Obama? How do you feel about that?
He's lying and being deceitful. He's known this was going on, and his White House staff has known this has been going on for over 2 years, because it started making the news back then when Tea Party groups started protesting and doing news articles on it. So when they say they had no knowledge of it, they are lying, and they're being deceitful to the American people.
Why do you think the Tea Party was unfairly targeted? What about it? Is it simply because of politics and partisanship?
It's politics and political philosophy. What we have going on in Washington, D.C., Republican and Democrat, okay, is what we call statists. They believe that the government should be all-powerful and all-control. So anybody that opposes that and say, no, wait a minute, you guys don't have the authority to do that, you are under the restrictions of the Constitution, they try to suppress that because they are in charge.
So are you guys going to try to file again now that the department heads have kind of...
We haven't discussed what to do with that.
Yeah. But as an attorney, you guys do not have taxes and status?
No, we're a nonprofit in the state of Mississippi, but we pay taxes at the federal level.
Gotcha. And so how has that impacted your organization, just not getting that tax exempt status?
Well, it did not hurt us, because most of our members, they're passionate about restoring this country. And so they're not doing it to gain a tax exemption. Okay, they're doing it for a mission, for a purpose, a cause, if you will. And so, no, it did not hurt our membership, and it has not hurt our efforts.
Now, sorry, I just borrowed a couple of notes here. The acting chief of the IRS says that mistakes were made, poor service were provided. Are you buying any of that?
No, I'm not. I believe it was deliberate, intentional, and specific. We noticed, there's a couple more stories today in the news about they were quickly approving liberal, socialist, progressive groups, but they specifically targeted Tea Party and Patriot.
What do you think needs to happen now?
Not just firing the people, but people need to go to jail. All the way from the commissioner that was in charge at that time, his deputy commissioner, all the levels of management, all the way down through the individual employees who actually sent those letters. They need to be fired. That's criminal abuse of privilege and power, and it has to be made. They have to be dealt with forcefully so that people in other departments will not go down those same roads.
What do you think President Obama should do?
He needs to be impeached and removed from office.
Wow. And so, I know you guys haven't said if you guys want to file again, but have you discussed any kind of legal action with regards to this?
We're aware of it, but we haven't discussed it or made any decisions.
Have you talked with other Tea Party groups throughout the country?
We have. In fact, our executive director, Julia Hodges, she is in Washington, D.C. right now. She was at the press conference yesterday with Michelle Balkin and several senators and other representatives. Regarding this issue, speaking out on this abuse by the IRS. They were there calling for actions, and she was this morning in the hearings, subcommittee hearings on the IRS.
I understand that. Is there anything else you want to say to me that you said to 16? I know you have the letters with the under perjury.
Yeah, one of the things to note is when these letters were sent, that they put a clause that was required to be on any correspondence from us, stating that everything we said was absolutely the truth, total, complete, no exceptions, under penalty of perjury. So what they were doing, they were not just using their power to control whether you got an exemption or not. They were threatening us with jail time if they could find even the slightest error or discrepancy in anything we said.
Gotcha. Let me switch tapes real quick. I knew this was going to happen.
Technology update.
Yeah, seriously. All right, I want to move the camera back real quick. I'm just gonna talk a little bit more.
Okay.
You think the feedback is really
I got them in as deep as I can get them.
And so what do we have here that you're showing?
Okay, we have here the statement of under penalty of perjury. The information contains all relevant facts relating to the request of information. Such facts are true, correct, and complete. This sets it up so that if they find any minor detail missing, they can charge us with perjury.
And what are some of the questions that they were asking you?
Okay, I've outlined some of them here. They want copies of our web pages. Provide copies of such lists of show the purpose of the issues team and establish a national, state, and local list of Tea Party involvement. They want a list of who those are. Complete list of talking points. They want copies of materials that are used in showing members how to talk to public officials. Copies of our newsletters from the past year. Copies of all email communication to members and call for action. Provide materials to promote the events. Explain your relationship with the Tea Party Patriots. That's none of their business either. Copies of all contracts and agreements with third parties that you have entered into or plan to. You know, all that's irrelevant to tax exemption.
Have you guys applied for tax exemption before? No, I guess not.
No.
It's not under the
No.
Tea Party because it's still relatively new, I guess. But all right, then. Well, I do appreciate it, Mr. Nicholson. Looks like it all came out.
Yeah, it did. I mean,
You go with yourself.
yeah, Chris, when you look at this thing as a whole, I didn't get the whole statement out, but when you look at an administration that uses the IRS to attack its political enemies, okay, and suppress speech, okay, that's not how a constitutional republic and a constitutional president acts. When you look at an administration that uses the FBI to go after the AP phone records
Yes.
to suppress and interfere with freedom of press, that is not how a constitutional government and president acts. When you look at a government that found itself being totally derelict in its duties to protect American interests in Benghazi, trying to cover it up and continue lies to Congress and the American people, that's not how a constitutional government and a president act. That is how tyrants act. That's how these third world country tyrants behave. And that's what we're making a point of, is that these things are not, they're not American. They're not constitutional. These are so far beyond the restraints of the Constitution that they are criminal and they're impeachable. And what we have a history in this country of trying to do is we remove tyrants. Now, the Tea Party is not anti-government. We're pro-government. We're pro the constitutional government that our founding fathers gave us. And that constitution, remember in the Declaration it said that governments are instituted among men to secure those rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The Constitution was the consent of the governed that the federal government could have certain specific explicit powers. Those powers are enumerated in 3 different parts of the Constitution, and it plainly says in 2 places that anything not specifically authorized is reserved for the states or the people. And it even goes on to say in one of the amendments that the absence of something being named does not mean that it can be included in the powers. It's specific, but that has been totally ignored. We have got a federal government that continues to grow and swell. And it's a philosophy that we're seeing in Republicans and Democrats. They're pretty much all the same in their view of government being all powerful and being all to everyone. So they create situations where they offer the states or individuals money, which of course they took from you by force to begin with, but then you have to submit to their unconstitutional demands in order to keep that money. For instance, Department of Education. EPA things to do with prisons, things to do with roads. They shut down the speed limits, remember, years ago, maybe before you were driving, down to 55 miles an hour. And the way they did that is they were taking money that they had taken by force from the American people, and they were giving it to states to build highways, okay, road repair and stuff like that. And they said, if you don't reduce it to 55, we will take back all of your funding. We will stop funding you. So that's the kind of thing they do. They do it with education. They don't have any authority to be in education. They don't have any authority to be in welfare. But they do it under threat of taking money from them.
This is what happens. You have my contact information. Definitely call me if there's
Do you have
anything.
a card, Chris? Because I think all I've got is your cell number.
Let me see that one.
Okay.
I think that's-
I'm gonna turn it off.